Chapter 31. Star Dou Zhe. Looking at the green-clothed girl firmly walking forward, the training field became silent as blazing gazes focused upon her figure. From the high platform, all high-class clan members stopped their chatter as they also focused on the Pearl of Zhe clan. Zizon, together with the three elders, all had a serious face, with a hint of curiosity. They really want to know what stage the number one person of the younger generation in Zhe clan has achieved after 1 year of training. Here, all eyes zoomed intensively downwards at the girl who is walking towards the stone monument at a pace that was neither slow nor fast. She raised her small hand, revealing her snow-white skin as the sleeve is pulled back. As her precious hands softly touched the stone monument, Zana gradually closes her eyes as her inner Dou Zhe quickly strengthened. Accepting the incoming Dou Zhe, the ever-silent monument shined out bright rays of light. Star Dou Zhe. Looking at these four giant words shining on the stone monument in the center of the training ground, for a moment everybody was silenced. Then, as if awakening, they all burst into cheers. Miss Zana, Star Dou Zhe. Being surprised by the four shining yellow letters, the operator couldn't help but shake his head. Ha ha, 15 years old Dou Zhe, she truly is. Listening to the announcement of the examiner, Zizon took a light breath, but his last words became mumbled. The three elders lightly nodded as their faces showed their surprise. Although there was still a slight difference with Ziyan's achievement of becoming a Dou Zhe when he was 12 years old, this training speed of hers can be considered monstrous. In the middle of the training ground, Dmi, who had just been admired by everyone, was also dizzied by the four shining words on the stone pillar. Staring at the monument, she felt a sense of helplessness. Only 15 years old to become a Star Dou Zhe, that achievement blinded her who didn't expected that prowess from Zana. At the end of the crowd, Ziyan nervously pursed his lips. He didn't expect Zana to enter the Dou Zhe zone and also reach 1 star, a whole tier above someone who just compressed his or her Chi cyclone. This speed of training can even be compared to him who's using Foundation Elixir to boost his training speed. Zana ignored the other people and furrowed her brow disapprovingly as if she didn't like the attention. Then she walked back into the crowd and noticing Ziyan's surprise, she smiled playfully. Don't be so proud. With your talent, this achievement is within my expectation. If you didn't reach Dou Zhe level, then I would be quite surprised. Ziyan shrugged and joked. Hearing that, Zana's little face became sorrowful for a moment, glancing at him. Pulling Zana to sit down on the mat, Ziyan looked bored as he observed other clan members continuing the examinations. Honestly speaking, to train one's Dou Zhe to 7 Duan Zhe before the age of 15 required decent talent to succeed. However, those with decent talent aren't as plentiful as one may think, and even within the entire Zhe clan, only 2 to 3/10 people make it. As time passed, more and more people were deemed unqualified, dulling the atmosphere of the training field. Those that didn't pass showed a long face when they were rejected, but when they saw others also not pass, a slight smile would creep onto their faces. Sitting on the ground, Ziyan continued to observe the examination. Over 100 of examinee, but only 2 people were like Zimi and got 8 Duan Zhe, and nobody achieved 9 Duan Zhe, let alone becoming a Dou Zhe. Of course, it's with Zana excluded. On the field, the number of examinees slowly dwindled, and finally there were only Ziyan and several people left. Soon, a bleak young examinee stood up and went up even though he knew that he had no chance of qualifying. For the last dozen or so examinees, everybody knew that these people were at the bottom of the clan, and if not for fair examinations, it was probably that these people would have been disqualified without ever testing. Ziyan, standing next to the stone pillar below, the operator announced the name with difficulty. Ziyan Zhe, it's your turn, Zana said gently, her soft small hands lightly holding Ziyan's hand. Slightly raising his head, Ziyan opened his eyes and scanned the training field. He couldn't help but snicker when he saw the gazers filled with expectations of his failure. Slowly standing up, Ziyan turned his head toward the high platform and grinned at Zizon. Looking at his son coming forward while smiling toward him, Zizon cheerfully nodded his head while one hand brought a teacup forward and smoothly laid back on his chair. Silently inhaling, Ziyan confidently walked toward the stone pillar. His eyes shined a strange light that made the laughing clan members widen their eyes. Under complex gazes, Ziyan finally got to the black monument. Looking at the black-clothed youth in front of him, the examiner sighed internally. That year, when Ziyan created a miracle, he was the first one to witness it, but he was also the witness of the sad steps of the genius 3 years after that bright shine. If today's miracle doesn't happen, this would also be the last time this youth gets examined. On the training ground, the intense gazers focused on Ziyan, whose chest slowly rose as he brought his hand forward and rested it upon the cold, hard, stone pillar. At this moment, everybody focused their gaze upon the monument. They all knew that this was the last time they would ever see the genius who once shocked all of Wutan City in a Dou Zhe examination. The stone monument went silent for a moment before bright light blazed out. Upon the stone monument were bright yellow words, making all the hearts in the field stop for a moment. Dou Zhe 7 Duan, Chapter 32 Challenge. Silence, a death-like silence. Everyone in the field looked at the monument's 5 words in shock. Their facial expressions were colorful, and soon, countless deep breaths resonated throughout the field. Kacha, on the high platform, Zizhan's jade cup was crushed to dust as a mix of dust and tea trickled down his hand. 7 Duan. Yana, you ... You really did it. Zizhan's eyes moistened as he watched the young man under the black monument. He knew that in order to get to 7 Duan Che, Ziyan must have made an incredible effort. The 3 elders next to Zizhan had faces full of incredulity. To have gone from 3 Duan Che just a year ago to 7 Duan. This speed, impossible. Hehe, clan leader's foundation elixir is pretty good, hehe. The second elder swallowed dryly and combined his shock with his not yet gone taunt from before to make a ridiculous expression. Zizhan didn't hide his excitement when he said, "Second elder, do you really believe that a second-tier foundation elixir has such a strong effect?" The second elder paused before shaking his head. He was no idiot and knew that even though the foundation elixir could raise one's training speed, it was physically impossible to raise for Duan Che within a year. Next to the black monument, the operator blankly stared at the words on the monument as his impassive face was now full of shock. Ziyan, Dou Zhe, 7 Duan, high level. Taking a deep breath to calm his shock, the operator tried hard to keep his voice calm, but a couple of tremors could still be heard. Hearing the operator's announcement, the originally silent field had gone deathly quiet. No one even rustled their clothing or fidgeted. In the crowd, Dmi covered her red mouth as her face was frozen in a moment of incredible shock. To raise for Duan Che in a year was like a myth, only heard of in legends. This was a speed that even the Ziyan 3 years ago, at his peak, could not have done. But this mythical speed, coming from a cripple, was displayed in front of their eyes. With complex emotions, Dmi stared at the young man next to the black monument while a thought popped up in her head. His incredible talent seems to have come back. At the edge of the training field, Zining, who was ready to insult Ziyan, was also blankly staring at the monument while whispering, "How is this possible?" Looking up to the golden words on the monument, Ziyan let out a light breath. Taking in the complex gazes around made him recall the glory that he had gone through 3 years ago. Now that his training talent had come back, he had also gained a mature mind and stubborn persistence. Taking a deep look at the monument that had determined his fate, not once, not twice, but thrice, Ziyan made a slight smile. His calm and passive demeanor was a sharp contrast from his gleeful attitude 3 years ago. Taking a small breath, Ziyan walked down under the penetrating gaze of everyone and sat down next to Zana. Even though Ziyan had left the monument, the entire field was still silent. Ahem, on the high platform, Zizhan happily stood up and coughed to gather the attention of everyone in the field. The examination has finished. Next up, those that did not have the chance to challenge someone who has already passed. Remember, there's only one chance, Zizhan said with a smile. Hearing that, the training field became disorderly. Those that only missed the cutoff by a bit sent their hot gazes towards those that made it. Watching the challenging gazes, the clansmen that made the cut would raise their heads in disdain. There was a huge gap between 6 Duan Che and 7 Duan Che, and without any special occurrences, someone who's 6 Duan Che couldn't even touch someone who's 7 Duan Che. The 6 Duan Che people knew this very well, but this was their last chance to stay in the inner circles of the clan. They would have to try and hope for a miracle. With Zizhan's words, the atmosphere in the training field took a weird turn. Intense gazes swept across those that made the cut and silently chose the weakest opponent. Sitting on the ground, Ziyan suddenly opened his eyes in surprise. A majority of the gazes were directed at him. Do I look like someone who can be beat so easily? After a brief period of shock, Ziyin laughed on the inside. Ziyin Zhe jumped for Duan Che in 1 year. Even though it's shocking, it's so shocking that many people don't believe it. Therefore, they would think that Ziyin is the easiest opponent. Beside him, Zunwu explained. Carelessly shrugging his shoulders, Ziyin patted the dust off of his robe while saying, "They can choose to not believe it, but they will know." Zunwu gave a smile and nodded. Finally, after a brief period of calm, someone couldn't stand it and stood up. A well-built young man, under everyone's gaze, quickly walked in front of Ziyin and loudly said, "Ziyin Baodi, please." Even though the young man was respectful, Ziyin, who was across from him, could see hints of disbelief flash through his eyes. In addition, his face showed an arrogant disdain. Looks like he hasn't recovered from Ziyin's former name of being a cripple. Chapter 33, Proof. Watching the quick challenger, the other unqualified clansmen let out a sigh of regret. It seemed like they were all envious of the well-built young man in front of Ziyin. Ziyin narrowed his eyes as he examined the young man. Even though he didn't know all of the clansmen in the clan, he had quite an impression of the young man in front of him. If his memory served him, the young man was called Zike and was a supporter of the first elder. Normally, he'd follow behind Zining like a small henchman, and when Ziyin fell from genius, Zike never showed him any kindness and instead trampled over Ziyin's dignity. Recalling old memories, Ziyin's mouth curved to a dangerous angle. Turning to look at the smiling Zunwu, Ziyin smiled while nodding, saying, "All right, I accept." Seeing how easily Ziyin answered, Zike's eyebrows twitched and a sense of fear snuck into his heart. Dryly swallowing, Zike started to regret his recklessness. Even though he was somewhat regretful, Zike couldn't back down and had to continue through. No way, to raise for Duan Che in 1 year is impossible. This guy must have used some method to fool everyone. I can definitely beat him. After wordlessly encouraging himself, Zike smiled. Then I'll see how strong Ziyin Baodi is. Ziyin smiled and didn't say anything. Standing up, he walked to the center of the training field and motioned for Zike to follow him. Watching the calm Ziyin, Zike's heart skipped a beat, and he no longer felt so sure. Forcefully smiling, he walked with stiff strides into the field. With the two people in the field, even the calculating gazes from the people who did not pass quickly moved onto the two in the field. On the high platform, Zizon took a handkerchief that was brought up to him and cleaned his hand of residue while intently staring at the training field with a sense of tension in his eyes. To be honest, not only did the younger generation have doubt about Ziyin's achievements, Zizon himself couldn't completely believe it either. This wasn't because of his lack of trust in Ziyin, but rather because of how impossible of a feat it was to raise for Duan Che in just 1 year. It was inhuman. Even the Ziyin 4 years ago couldn't hope to achieve it. Because of how incredible the achievement was, nobody could believe what they were saying. But no matter if it was fake or real, no matter if the others believed it or not, once Ziyin fought, his real strength would be exposed. At that time, everyone would have their thoughts confirmed or disproved. Besides Zizon, the three elders' breathing intensified as their hands gripped deep hand marks on their respective chairs and their muddled eyes stared at the training field. In the green-rocked training field, everyone's vision was glued to the two within the training field. Once Ziyin fought with Zike, everything would be clear. It's definitely fake. At the edge of the training field, Zining licked his dry lips and angrily whispered, "It should be fake, right?" Within the crowd, Zmi bit her lip. She couldn't believe that the young man that had been crippled 3 years would have such a monstrous achievement. Under stare after stare, Ziyin and Zike in the training field had already finished their perfunctory ritual gestures and were about to fight. Both of Zike's hands were tilted upwards as light Dou Zhe started swirling around his hands. Taking a deep breath, Zike stomped heavily on the ground and started to ram towards Ziyin. Low-level fights didn't have any complex gestures and were composed of the simplest attacks. Splitting Mountain Hand, quickly nearing Ziyin, Zike's right hand quickly gathered Dou Zhe as it swept over to Ziyin's chest. Splitting Mountain Hand, a middle Huang Do technique that was only available to clan members 5 Duan Che and higher. With the gust incoming, the lagging hair on Ziyin's face blew away as a pair of dark eyes were revealed. Blinking, Ziyan narrowed his eyes watching the ever-nearer hand. When the hand finally reached Ziyan's shoulder, Ziyan smoothly took a step to the left. With a year's worth of body training, Ziyan's reactions were incredibly quick. With only one step, Ziyan avoided ZK's attack. At the same time, Ziyan lightly twisted his body as his hand reached through ZK's arm and went to ZK's shoulder as if he was picking a leaf from a tree. Shatter Rock Hand, a low Huang-level Do technique that only required 3 Duanche to learn. Peng! A dull sound occurred as Ziyan's hand landed firmly on ZK's shoulder, causing ZK's flush red face to pale. With a low grunt, he slowly stepped backwards before finally losing strength in his legs and fell to the ground like a turtle. The whole field was silent. ZK's defeat proved many things. Defeating his opponent in one attack, Ziyan shaked his head bored. This kind of opponent wasn't even a challenge for Ziyan. Not mentioning Octane Blast, Ziyan hadn't even used half of his strength yet. Of course, contrary to Ziyan's bored feeling, everyone within the field was shocked. Many of them slowly closed their eyes because Ziyan had to be at least 7 Duanche to have easily beat ZK, who was a 6 Duanche. Thinking about that, Ziyan's previous monstrous performance was proved to be true. To raise for Duanche in just 1 year, his result was a miracle within a miracle. On the high platform, Zizon let out a deep breath as a weight was lifted from his heart. It's true, 7 Duanche. Watching the defeated ZK, Zimei's small hand covered her red lips as she couldn't help but gasp. Chapter 34. Turning around, watching the black-clothed young man with his hands behind his back, the whole field was quiet again. On the high platform, Zizon's smile slowly widened before finally, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hearing the gleeful laughter from Zizon, the 3 elders looked at each other and sighed. However, they didn't try to do anything else against Ziyan. The potential displayed by Ziyan gave them a sense of defeat. For Duanche in 1 year was something that would make anyone shocked. Their sons and grandsons wouldn't hope to ever have that pace. With a light heart, Zizon clapped while announcing, ZK Zia has lost. Hopefully you will continue to train hard. TL, Zia is nephew in Chinese. In the training field, the pale-faced ZK heard the announcement and drooped his head in disappointment. Taking a look at the black-clothed young man not far from him, he recalled about how he had insulted the very person, calling him a cripple just a year ago. Now 1 year later, the cripple was quite close to the top of the clan and far above him. This extreme difference made ZK recall the words he had heard in the hall just a few months before, 30 years east, 30 years west. Don't you dare bully me because I'm poor now. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, ZK got up with some difficulty. Slightly bowing to Ziyan, ZK's voice had lost all of its arrogance from before. Ziyan Baodi, Yuan. Congratulations on your recovery. Nodding, Ziyan's gaze slowly swept across the training field and those that met his dark pupils all turned away their gaze with nervousness and unease. His gaze pausing on Zmei who was staring at him, Ziyan twisted his face to face the clansman that didn't pass and asked with a smile, "Is there anyone else who would like to challenge me?" Watching Ziyan, the clansmen that were eager to challenge Ziyan before ZK went up all closed their mouths and looked up at the sky as if Ziyan's words had nothing to do with them. None of them would go up and be the second challenger. Watching the childish acts of pretending to be a fool, Ziyan lightly shrugged and walked back. Seeing Ziyan sit beside her, Zana smiled while examining the field. Picking up a strand of her hair and twirling it, she whispered, "Ziyan Zhe, 3 years ago, they looked at you like this. 3 years ago, I would have been excited by their respectful and fearful gazes, but today, I don't feel anything." Ziyan touched his nose and laughed. "Then Ziyan Zhe has matured." Zana playfully blinked her eyes. "Not more mature than you? Sometimes I feel as if there's a 1,000-year monster hiding within you." Being called mature by a girl, Ziyan couldn't help but laugh. Intimately rubbing Zana's head, he let out a smile. Hearing that, Zana gave Ziyan an evil eye and her delicate face showed an expression of rebuke. No matter how carefree a girl was, no one ever liked being called an old monster. Zana's expression of rebuke was so pretty that it attracted the stares of the young men around her and even the stares of some of the girls. "That brat, to Pompa Si Ning, like the others, was also attracted to Zana's expression of rebuke, but looking at the intimate chatter between Zana and Ziyan, an envious flame burned within him. His jealousy covered up his reasoning as he thought that only he could match Zana within the entire clan, but thinking back, he realized that no matter what he did, Zana rarely smiled. On the other hand, Ziyan, who was a cripple, could always make Zana laugh. The difference between them made Zining crush his teeth in anger. "Brat, I'll let you be arrogant for now, but when the coming-of-age ceremony comes, I will make you look for your fallen teeth in front of Zana." Clenching his hands into fists, Zining gave a cold stare to the cross-legged Ziyan. Even though Zining was also shocked by Ziyan's training speed in the past year, he couldn't change his haughty manner that he was used to. In addition, Zining, being the only male within the entire clan that could barely be compared to Zana, felt a sense of danger from Ziyan's sudden performance. Before he grows strong, I'll give him a merciless beating. The best-case scenario is that the beating would leave a scar and break him from his training. While thinking his evil thoughts, the corners of Zining's mouth curved into a smile. Even though Ziyan was at 7 Duan Che, Zining was still confident in his 8 Duan Che. After all, each Duan of Che after 7 Duan Che had a huge difference between them. Chatting in a low voice with Zana, Ziyan's aimlessly sight-gazed around the sides of the training field and caught the smile on Zining's face. Thinking for a moment, Ziyan realized what the smile was about and smiled himself, thinking, someone who can't even cover up his or her emotions can't pose to be a risk at all. After Zike lost to Ziyan, no one else dared to challenge Ziyan, who was sitting down, and those clansmen that didn't qualify set their sights on others. But after a couple rounds of challenges, only two people, relying on luck and familiar Do techniques, were able to beat their opponent and qualify for the coming-of-age ceremony. Watching the slowly calming training field, the smiling Zizon stood up and announced the results along with a couple of notices about next month's coming-of-age ceremony. Slowly standing up, Ziyan smiled towards the happy Zizon on the stage, while Zizon wasn't stingy about giving his qualified son a thumbs up. Right after dusting off his clothes, Ziyan detected a perfumed scent. Curling his brows slightly, Ziyan lifted his head to see Zmei standing in front of him and asked, "Do you need anything?" Seeing the impassiveness and coldness on Ziyan's face, Zmei's courage faltered as she forced out a smile and said, "Ziyan Baodi, congratulations." "Thanks." Slightly nodding, Ziyan glanced at Zana beside him. "Ziyan Baodi, my father will be personally teaching a high Huang-level Do technique at the Do Technique Hall tomorrow. Do you want to come with me?" Zmei smiled, and her combination of a female's charm and a youth's delicacy created an irresistible question. Hearing that, Ziyan's brows slightly jumped. Right when Ziyan was about to find an excuse to reject Zmei, a pale white arm slipped through and locked with his arm. Shocked, Ziyan turned around to find a smiling Zana. "Really sorry, Zmei Bae. Zana has already invited Ziyan Zhe to accompany me tomorrow to visit Wutan City, and so he can't be going with Zmei Bae to the Do Technique Hall." Under stunned stares, Zana held on to Ziyan's arm, while a hint of apology lingered on her delicate face. Chapter 35. Guilt. Hearing Zana's words, Zmei paused and weighed her thoughts carefully. If it was any other girl within the clan, Zmei was confident that she could come out on top based on her beauty and talent, but towards Zana, Zmei could only admit defeat. Seeing that Ziyan's face was impassive, Zmei gave a self-deprecating smile and could only leave in defeat. The crowd within the training field stared at Ziyan, who was being leaned on by Zana, and they all felt twinges of jealousy. When had Zana, being the brightest pearl of the entire clan, been so close with another male? Watching Zmei awkwardly walking away, Ziyan was stunned, and turning his head to see the smiling Zana, he taunted, "Girl, what are you doing?" Zana still hung onto Ziyan's arm as she glanced over at the staring crowd and innocently said, "Wasn't Ziyan Zhe about?" Hearing that, Ziyan rolled his eyes. The excuse he had in mind was completely different from what Zana implied with her excuse. Remembering the awkward expression on Zmei's face, Ziyan helplessly shook his head while thinking, did Zana do that on purpose? It's just that Zana doesn't like how fast she changed. Ho, going to Do Technique Hall to learn a Do technique together. She never invited you in the past 3 years. Zana dragged Ziyan out of the training field slowly as she ignored the gazes around her. At the same time, she muttered words that only Ziyan could hear. Looks like she really didn't like how quickly Zmi changed. Lightly shrugging, Ziyan agreed with Zana with a bitter smile. 3 years ago, Zmi was quite close to him, but when Ziyan received the title of cripple, he was able to see how realistic Zmi was. Watching Ziyan and Zana leave the field, Zining's face twitched while his hands clenched so hard that bone-cracking sounds could be heard. His jealousy even made his eyes slightly red. "Brat, 1 month from now, I'll break all of your teeth." Zining spat the words out as he angrily left the training field. On the high platform, Zizon was about to leave when he saw the scene and intently stared at Zana and Ziyan while a hint of worrying flashed across his eyes. Yana, does he like Zana? Zana's background. Not even Nalan Yanran can compare to her. Even with genius-level talent, it would be extremely difficult to be approved of by the power behind her. After thinking for a while, Zizon let out a sigh as he slowly left. While walking, Ziyan would suddenly blank out as he recalled what had just happened. Turning a corner, Zana suddenly let go of Ziyan's arm with a red face. Pushing out her cheeks, she stared at Ziyan accusingly. Losing the momentum that was dragging him forward, Ziyan felt at a loss as to what to do and even sighed for no reason. His eyes moved to Zun as he thought about what Zana implied. Feeling the blank stare of Ziyan, Zana's small face flushed red as her hands instinctively raised up. And she said, "Ziyan Zhe, you?" I am waking up from his stupor. Ziyan violently coughed while his face became an unhealthy red and he thought, when did I go so low to think that towards my own sister? Even though Zana and Ziyan didn't have an actual blood relationship, they both lived with each other for over a decade and their relationship wasn't much worse than that of a blood brother or sister. It wasn't surprising that Ziyan had already thought of Zana as his little sister and felt guilt and repulsion towards himself when he realized what he was thinking about. With that sudden realization, the atmosphere became quite awkward. Zana lowered her head and her usual elegance had been replaced with a girl's embarrassment. Occasionally, she tilted her gaze to peek at the side of Ziyan's face, who was looking straight forward. Under the awkward atmosphere, the not very long path felt like a great conquest that took forever to get to the end. Of course, despite how long the conquest felt like, it had an end, where the path split into directions. At here, Ziyan softly said bye and started fleeing. Ziyan Zhe. Watching the panicked Ziyan, Zana was stunned by the sight before she called out, "Huh!" Stopping, Ziyan looked back to see Zana standing beneath a willow and his heart started beating quickly again. Zana had a green robe with a purple belt that fluttered in the wind. She and the willow behind her made a picture that didn't seem earthly. "Tomorrow, will you accompany Zana?" Under the branches of the willow, the girl's delicate face had a red flush as her jade teeth bit her pink lips. A pair of beautiful eyes were watching Ziyan with a hint of anticipation.